INEC warns candidates and political parties against premature campaigns.
Section 99, subsection 1 prohibits campaigns by political parties earlier than 90 days.
President Buhari asks religious leaders to condemn forces of division and destruction.
National Assembly resumes, adjourns to honor late colleague.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss management of mental health in Nigeria.
The World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, work productively and fruitfully, as well as being able to make a contribution to his or her community.
Well, that's right, Joy. Now, the absence of the factors you have enumerated is what experts refer to as mental illness, which is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood, as well as the ability to relate to others and function from day to day.
Now, Kingsley, it is common in Nigeria to hear people say, "You the craze," or "Are you mad? Are you out of your mind?" all in a bid to query an unusual behavior or an unexpected conduct from someone they expect to behave in a particular way. Of course, the answer to this is almost predictable.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, a person who ordinarily probably is crazy will retort that he or she isn't crazy. And oftentimes it's deemed to be an insult when such a question is posed. Now, the point is that mental illness, or the suspicion of it, is one of the major health challenges that humanity faces. In fact, it is said to be the 6th largest disease burden worldwide, more than HIV.
That's right, Kingsley. The situation is even more worrisome in Nigeria as there is no adequate data on mentally ill persons in Nigeria. However, some experts suggest that 1 of 7 persons in Nigeria could have serious mental illnesses, while 1 in 4 persons will have some form of mental disorder.
Well, of course, it is difficult to contend with those stats that you have just released, as experts have proven that mental illness is no respecter of age, gender, economic status, ethnic or religious affiliation, or even social status, as any human being could develop a mental illness.
Some of the conditions that breed mental illness are substance abuse, attention deficit, physical and emotional abuse, distress and anxiety, hyperactivity, depression, and much more. But the bigger issue is the treatment of these conditions.
And quite aside from the stigma usually associated with mental ill health in Nigeria, very few persons willingly submit themselves to mental treatment, and many, of course, deny the condition or blame it on others or the devil, as the case may be.
And Kingsley, this is further complicated with the lack of adequate infrastructure and facilities for treatment, as well as shortage of trained personnel to handle the situation. So, as the world marks the World Mental Health Day, we shall dig in to throw some light into this challenge and how it is being managed in Nigeria.
Now, among the slew of questions we shall be asking our experts who will be with us in the studios, we'll also try to find out whether indeed mental illness could be hereditary. And what is the line between irrational behavior and mental illness? As I said, we have experts who will be proffering answers to these questions and more. It's on that note we'd like to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria, broadcasting live as always from the Abuja headquarters studios of the Nigerian Television Authority. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Joy Usiago. It's always good to have you join us on the program. Today is the midweek edition, and as always, the complimentary segments of the program shall be brought to you, including newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and entertainment news. For now, Anne Jibuno is ready to serve us the morning news. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Joy. And Kingsley, good morning. Here's the news. Religious leaders in the country have been urged to render necessary support, cooperation and assistance to the government towards overcoming all forces of destruction for sustainable peace and socio-economic development. President Muhammadu Buhari, who made the appeal, said this can be achieved if their followers are properly enlightened and guided to guard against religious extremism and terrorism. This was while receiving the leadership of Qadiriyya Islamic movement in Africa, led to the villa by Kano State Governor Abdullahi Ganuji. And President Muhammadu Buhari says no part of Nigeria will either be ignored or neglected or unfairly treated under his watch. The president gave the assurance while granting audience to a high-powered delegation of Ugep Kingdom in Cross River State, led by the Obolopon of Ugep Obol Ofem Ubana. And the National Assembly has reconvened and read a backlog of executive communications, after which it adjourned in honor of late member of the House of Representatives, Funke Adedoyin from Kwara State, who died during the recess. Similarly, on resumption, the House of Representatives adjourned plenary to Wednesday, October 10th, in honor of the deceased lawmaker, in line with the House rules.
We're back now. We will set ourselves to accomplish what is there in the interest of our people, and even if it means within a day or two, we have done that in the area of ease of doing business.
Now, the Nigerian Geological Survey Agency has released the report on the alleged volcanic eruption activity in Mpape, Abuja.
What happened was that the high tension leaked current through the rods used in the construction of the electric pole, and it generated so much temperature to the range of between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees centigrade, and this was high enough to melt the material upon which the pole was founded.
Any political party or candidate that engages in campaigns ahead of the 2019 general elections for now will face the law. INEC's chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, gave the indication during a workshop for election professionals from the Commonwealth African region in Abuja.
Campaign for presidential and National Assembly elections will commence on the 18th of November 2018, while governorship and state assembly elections will begin on the 1st of December 2018. I call upon political parties and candidates to strictly adhere to these dates.
As part of its move to ensure speedy dispensation of the cases before it and disciplined approach to hearing the matters, the Supreme Court is to begin the publication of its course list 3 months ahead of their hearing. Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onogen, in furtherance of this policy, has directed that appeals listed for hearing between now and December be published immediately on the website of the Supreme Court.
You blame it on the judiciary, even though it is the lawyer who comes to court, it is the lawyer who keeps the case in court. It is the lawyer who, after the Supreme Court have made pronouncements upon pronouncements in various cases on the same issue, still insist that the matter lingers up to 2018, and in 2019 there will be another line of cases.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed continues his advocacy visit to media organizations as part of an ongoing national campaign against fake news, with a visit to the corporate headquarters of DA Communication, owners of AIT and Raypower FM.
From being patriotic, I think it's also in the enlightened self-interest of media houses to to support our fight against fake news.
We are aware of our mandate, we are aware of our constitutional responsibility to Nigeria and Nigerians, and we would like to assure you that we will not shrink our responsibility.
Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Joy and Kingsley after the break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem promptly through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
You in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. Girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. It's you. Dry throat. Strepsils. Hello in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils. Strepsils. Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Your detergent and with new look Ariel.
Ariel, now in a new look pack. Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action.
Thanks for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria this Wednesday. For some business news now, prices of oil rose on Tuesday as a result of falling crude export from Iran, OPEC's third largest producer, in anticipation of new sanctions by the United States and a partial shutdown in the Gulf of Mexico due to Hurricane Michael. Let's join Kunle Adeyeye for details.
Benchmark Brent crude was up 65 cents at 84.56 per barrel, having fallen as low as $82.66 on Monday. Brent hit a 4-year high of 86.74 last week. US light crude was up 45 cents at $74.74. Iran's crude export fell further in the first week of October, according to tanker data and an industry source, as buyers sought alternatives ahead of US sanctions. Meanwhile, oil companies operating in the Gulf of Mexico shut down nearly 20% of oil production as Hurricane Michael moved towards eastern Gulf states, including Florida. The hurricane would likely miss major oil-producing assets in the Gulf, but a change of trade could widen the impact. And at the ongoing International Monetary Fund meeting in Bali, Indonesia, the International Monetary Fund said it will review its global economic growth forecasts for 2018 and 2019. Explaining reasons for its action, the International Monetary Fund said trade tensions and rising import tariffs were taking a toll on commerce while emerging markets struggle with tighter financial conditions and capital outflows. In another development, the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria has called for the adoption of a code of corporate governance for the aviation industry. Managing Director of AMCON, Ahmed Kuru, urged the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority to enforce sound corporate governance system on Nigerian carriers to ensure their sustainability. The AMCON boss said that lack of regulations and good corporate governance were the main factors responsible for the failure of about 160 Nigerian airlines, including the defunct national carrier Nigeria Airways. And next is graphic representation of Tuesday's trading on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Thank you very much, Kunle, there for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria. Next for us now, we'll take a look at the stories in some of today's newspapers.
Newspaper reviewer Bayo Atoibi is in the studio with us. Good morning, Bayo. Good to see you.
Good morning, Kingsley, and good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
Thank you.
And then let's begin with the papers that we have this morning. We're going to the inside pages of the papers to read out the headlines. Let's take a look at page 3 of the Daily Trust. That's our first paper. Daily Trust. No part of Nigeria will be ignored under my watch. That's attributed to President Buhari. And on page 5, it says Nigerian woman commits suicide over closure of shops in Ghana. And so those are the two stories from the Daily Trust that we have this morning.
All right, let's go quickly to the leadership newspapers, and we go to page 2. It says 2019, PDP's choice has made our campaign for President Muhammadu Buhari easier. And that comment is attributed to the Buhari Campaign Organization. We also have a similar story that we heard from Kingsley. No part of Nigeria will be ignored under my watch. That comment is also attributed to President Muhammadu Buhari. Still staying with the leadership newspaper on page 5, education remains antidote to extremism. That is coming from President Muhammadu Buhari. Can you see?
New Telegraph is next. New Telegraph at page 10. New Telegraph says scandal. That's the kicker. LASU sacks 3 lecturers. That story is from page 10 of New Telegraph. And another story from page 6 of the New Telegraph. Page 6 of New Telegraph says legislative aides protest over 4 billion naira unpaid salaries and allowances.
All right, still staying with leadership, we have a similar story on page 13. It says LASU sacks 3 lecturers over sexual assault. And we also have another story there which says a Senator Binta makes case for more female parliamentarians. You can get that from details of that story from page 7 of the leadership newspaper. Kingsley?
Bio. Yes. Let's take a look at the comments by the president. No part of Nigeria will be left out. This was made by Mr. President when he received a delegation from the Cross River State of Nigeria. And also, education is the antidote for criminality. Again, it was on occasion when he was receiving a delegation from Kano of a religious leader, and he said that anybody who straps contraptions on the bodies of children, young men, and send them to go and kill does not belong to any religion. They are purely terrorists and criminals, and so should be treated. And the only antidote for that kind of violence is education. That is the basis of it all. The other fallout are coming from the just concluded primaries. Some papers are reporting that there's what has been described as Plan B from some of the candidates, particularly ensuing from the presidential primaries of the People's Democratic Party. So far, Governor Aminu Waziri Tambuwal has a fallback position to recontest as governor. Senator Rabi Musa Kwankwaso is to fall back on his position, seeking to become the senator representing Kano Central, while Dr. Bukola Saraki is also has somebody holding in trust for him, the Kwara Central Senatorial. Governor Ibrahim Dankwambo also is expecting to contest to go into the Senate. However, Senators David Mark and Senator Jonah Jang have indicated that they are no longer returning to politics or going to contest. Particularly Senator David Mark, you will recall, is the most ranked senator. He's been senator since the return to democracy in 1999. He says he will now serve as an elder statesman and will prefer advice.
That's interesting. Bayo, let's take a look at the lead story on the front page of the Punch newspaper. It says EFCC sets up special team to grill Fayose over corruption charges. That's on page 2. It has a rider. Governor slams 20 billion naira suit on anti-graft agency.
All right, let's go to the Pilot newspaper, and we're going to page 6. The lead story there says, federal government pursuing education 2030 agenda with vigor. And that comment is attributed to the Minister of Education. And on page 13, NAS aides protest unpaid allowances. On page 12, federal government to strengthen Agric Agency for food security. Kingsley?
Yeah, that's all I have. Bayo, what's...
We're talking about NAS aids. These are legislative aids, and they said they have not been paid since August. And they lament that their counterpart, the political appointees, for whom most of them are aides, have always continued to have their salary paid. You know, the payment of legislative aid has a backlog of salaries has been a lingering issue. Of recent, it has been in the public domain, and they are now agitating that they've not been paid for so a while. Meanwhile, you recall that the Senate and the House of Rep resumed yesterday, and the critical issue that was discussed there was that there were 16 bills that were pending, particularly for which the executive had returned to the National Assembly with critical comments about why Mr. President cannot assent to those bills. And as a matter of national urgency, the Senate leader suggested on the floor, and it was accepted, that a special task force committee should be looked into to look into the critical issues raised by Mr. President why he withheld assent. Most of the bills, particularly 5 of them, relate to amendment to the Constitution, 2 others relate to a proposed amendment to the Electoral Act of 2010. There are some other bills that related to the function of Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, another one income tax relief amendment, and also petroleum industry governance bill. There's one also on advanced free fall. There are also executive bills that have been proposed to the National Assembly for legislative purposes. In the House of Representatives, the Speaker, Yakubu Dogara, was put to task about the concerns about budget for the for the 2019 general elections, as he specifically said. That has been taken care of in the 2018 budget. In fact, he revealed that the sum of about 300 billion has been provided for under the service-wide vote, which can be made available for the INEC for the purposes of conduct of elections. So there's no, according to him, there's no cause for alarm. And if the push comes to the hove, the instances have obtained in the past where first, second, and third reading can be accomplished and the bill passed and expeditiously within the period of 1 week.
All right.
All right, Kingsley, you have more there, or we should go to our editorial in a minute?
That's right.
All right, let's take our editorial for today, and it comes from the Nigerian pilot. It is captioned, "'Twas a conflict-free world." Recently, the world soberly stood still in honor and commemoration of peace and its importance among mankind. Lovers and advocates of peace gathered in various venues across the globe to commemorate the 2018 International Day of Peace with a view to recognizing the efforts of those who have worked so hard to end conflict and promote peace. As a country, that's referring to Nigeria, and people, we should reflect on the issue of peace and its significance to our unity, progress, and redevelopment, as well as apply ourselves to them without discrimination. Bayo?
Yes. Well, before I go to the editorial, let me quickly draw attention to a report that have come about Mbappe. You will recall that there are 2 concerns about Mbappe. First, there was the concerns about tremor, measuring about 0.3 on the Richter scale. Then later on, there was this effusion of smoke and some misty white substances, which raised the alarm that it could be probability of volcanic activity. The Director General of the what's that agency now? Geological Survey has clarified that what actually happened was that there was a problem with a 330 kVA line mast, below which there was a generation of heat to the temperature of about 1,600 to 2,000 centigrade, as a result of which there was this molten substance that was seen, and the white misty substance. And that has dispelled the fact that it was not a volcanic activity, but an incubation of heat which came from a conflict of wires on the 334 kVA line. So members of the public in Pape who were alarmed about the possibility of volcanic eruption can now sleep with their 2 eyes closed. Also, the alarms raised about possibilities of earthquake has been said that yes, there were indications about tremor, and this is as a result of about 310,000 boreholes dug in Abuja, which has actually affected the aquifer in the sub-region in Abuja. But nevertheless, they will be on the watch out and has asked for equipment to monitor that. So people in that area can now sleep with their eyes closed. Now, talking about...
Abuja is not the only city in the country that has boreholes sunk in different locations. And I'm sure that if they took a census of the boreholes around the country, they will find that the figures, I'm not sure what the figures will be, run into hundreds of thousands, if not up to 1 million. There's virtually no Nigerian city. And that's part of our public national embarrassment, that we are unable to have access to access to potable water from the public mains. There's no reticulation. Very few places have access to public sources of water supply. And everybody, of course, will have to rely on self. Beyond phase 1 of Abuja, where do you have access to public water supply? If you go to most Nigerian cities, I mean, it's the norm. It's the norm. And indeed, if you're going to embark on any urban renewal program, that's one of the major issues to tackle. To say, look, how do you reticulate, water supply? In other words, how do you lay the pipes? You have to excavate all the roads that they are building and commissioning now. and of course resurface them and be sure that the water supply is steady. Yes. If you don't have that, then people will continue to. That's why we say that everybody has a local government. You provide your own water, provide your own electricity, provide your own security, and then of course engage in self-help with regard to other things, plus self-medication.
Editorial, 2018 Day of Peace. Well, conflict around the world is a matter of concern, and the peak of it all came when the whole world jubilated that the President Donald Trump of the United States and the leader of North Korea had met, and that is one of the critical points around the world, that everybody was worried about the possibility of a clash that could involve nuclear. Also, the issue of nuclear in Iran is being taken care of, but consensus is that there has to be peace for the world to move forward. And so on the 2018 Day of International Day of Peace, everybody is reminded that peace is better for everybody to live in a developed and gradually safe world.
All right, Bayo, that's the much that we can take. I'd like to thank you for being around.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll get into a major item for discussion.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There is no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
For years, the NTA has been promoting science, technology, arts and crafts under the tagged name National Children's Expo. We are set with another edition as we gather children around Nigeria, junior category ages 6 to 12 and senior category ages 13 to 18. The theme for Expo 2018, achieving self-sufficiency in agriculture, meeting the challenges of security and exposition of alternative energy as pathways to national development. Date, October 21st to 25th, 2018. Venue, NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja. We are set to celebrate the best of innovation across the country. For more information, please call the following numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
The Aerial Assurance Challenge.
Oh, thank you. But what assurance can you give our daughter?
Everything. With the new look Ariel, I can even do the laundry.
Prove it then.
Okay. Let's make this stain even tougher. Now, let's wash the cloth with your detergent and with new look Ariel. Do you believe me now?
Ariel, now in a new look pack. Psst, you in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. Girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. Yes, you. Dry throat. Strepsils. Hello in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils. Strepsils! Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
Brought us as usual.
As usual. You have no problem.
For the three put
you are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
Welcome.
You take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobu to come to chocolate rice of made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It will boost our economy and will give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Thanks for staying with us. Now, correspondent Muhammad Garba Natala has put together this background report to usher us into our topic of discussion.
Mental illness is not uncommon in Nigeria. Psychiatrists believe that nearly everyone can develop a psychological disorder at some point in life, whether temporary or persistent. Stress, depression, anger, anxiety disorder, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, drug addiction among others are said to lead to mental illness. Those affected are sometimes labeled as crazy or insane, seen as dangerous by the public. Researchers estimate that 20 to 25% of the population suffer from mental illness, meaning that psychological distress could be severe enough to impair a person's behavior. The World Health Organization estimates that 4% of Nigerians suffer from depression. Yet, there is considerable neglect of mental health management in Nigeria, as those who suffer from it are largely stigmatized. Unlike other developed countries, for example, in Nigeria, people with such illness lack routine records and cannot walk into any psychiatric hospital freely. Part of the challenge is the country's approach to the implementation of mental health policies. Lack of policies and regulation create a low pool of professionals in mental health, including traditional and spiritual healers. Nevertheless, several initiatives and approach to mental health services are beginning to spring up. What are the constraints in Nigeria's health sector so far? How can mental health affect productivity? Is everyone liable to develop such illness? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria have answers to these questions and more shortly.
Muhammad Garba Natala, thank you very much for that background up. We have 4 guests with us here in the Abuja studios to discuss this issue in greater detail. First, we'd like to welcome Professor Andrew Zamani. Professor Zamani is the immediate past president of the Psychological Association, or rather the Nigerian Psychological Association, as it is called. It's a clinical psychologist. Professor Zamani, pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you.
Also here with us, another clinical psychologist, Dr. Moses Tingir. Moses Tingir, of course, as I said, is a clinical psychologist. Pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
And we have also a chief consultant psychiatrist at the National Hospital in Abuja. She's also a senior lecturer in psychiatry at the University of Abuja. That's Dr. Olushola Oluwanuga. Dr. Oluwanuga, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, clinical psychologist Samuel Junaidu. Junaidu, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right. Let's. I mean, I'm sure that some of our viewers will just be wondering, mental illness or mental ill health, is it a psychological problem or it's a psychiatric problem? Professor Zamani.
Well, you have talked about mental illness, and you have also talked about mental disorders. Mental disorders, they are psychiatric illnesses, meaning that they are discrete disease conditions that have been identified in relation to aberrant behaviors. But
Aberrant. Break it down for our viewers. Aberrant means unusual.
Unusual, abnormal, maladaptive behaviors. So when they exceed a particular clinical norm, which could be biological, which could be social, which also could be psychological, you say this is mental disorder, and so it's psychiatric. That means that medical help is really necessary to regulate the behavior and eventually to make people who have been so diagnosed to be amenable to other forms of interventions. It is possible to have a disturbed behavior and not be mentally ill in the sense that you are responding to issues and circumstances of life. You are responding to the stressors of life. You have been forced into a condition in which you will have to reprocess. You've been disorganized, your mental equilibrium has been disorganized. And so, you know, while in that state, you have a disturbed behavior, but you're not mentally ill, but could be mentally ill if these reactions eventually get exaggerated and if you do not find the help or support that is required in order to stabilize.
All right, thank you, Professor Zamani. You've raised a couple of issues that we'd like to speak to and also let the other guests also talk to. But for now, let's go to Dr. Oluwanuga. Let's hear from you. How would you define mental illness for the ordinary man?
Well, for the ordinary man, I would say that mental illness is a condition whereby there is persistent change in a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, and reaction to the environment. So that, for example, the fact that somebody hit another person on the road and they were just acting like they were crazy at the time, fighting and so, that's not illness. That's a spontaneous reaction and it's not sustained. Or the fact that somebody is bereaved and they're sad, for example, that's not an illness. The person is bereaved. But supposing the person wasn't bereaved and you just find that the person is sad, this goes on persistently for more than a month, the person is continuously sad, withdrawn, no real reason to explain this, you might begin to say, oh, is this person depressed? So then it has moved to the arena of illness. So there's a time factor there. There's the issue of sustainability.
I still like to get this clarification. Is mental illness or mental disorder, is it psychological or psychiatric?
Well, let's say that psychology is normal. Normal behavior, psychology refers to normal behavior. Like when you're talking about the way a child develops, what a 3-year-old child can do, how a 13-year-old should behave, that forms within the realms of psychology. Psychiatry is abnormal behavior, abnormal thinking, abnormal feeling.
So when, therefore, people talk about mental disorder or mental illness, or just being crazy, are they referring to one or the same thing? Let's bring in Chama Junaidu here.
Well, to add to what my colleagues and my senior colleagues have said, there is a very strict criteria for defining what mental illness is. You must look at the norm. You must look at the deviation. You must look at the distress. Is it constituting distress to other people around? Is it constituting distress to the individual? So there is a very strict criteria, including the time factor that the consultant talked about. There is a very strict criteria for defining what mental illness is. And once the individual is diagnosed using that strict criteria, then you can say this person is in dire need of intervention, in which case the intervention could be both psychological and psychiatry in terms of psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy. So there could be their interplay between what defines mental illness and how an individual can access help.
All right, let's bring in Dr. Moses Stinger into the conversation. We're trying to define mental illness. How do you draw the line between a case that is a psychiatric case and a psychological case?
Thank you very much. Mental illness, like the other participants have said, is an illness that affects your thinking, affects your feeling, and affects your behavior. So there are three things involved: your thinking, your feeling, and your behavior. So any kind of illness that alters the way you think, and by in turn altering the way you feel and the way you behave, is considered as a mental illness. But like my other colleague said, there is a criteria for diagnosis. Not that you just look at somebody behaving in an abnormal way or in an unusual way and then you would say the person is mentally ill. That would be probably wrong, because you may equally need to consider other criteria before you come to a conclusion that somebody is mentally ill. And that can only be done by a professional. So mental illnesses generally could become psychiatric if they, to an extent, cause significant distress to the person involved. The demarcation sometimes can be a bit difficult, because sometimes what one may consider or what one may say is psychiatric may not necessarily be psychiatric, but may be a behavioral issue. That is, it may be a deviation from the normal behavior, in which case may not necessarily be called psychiatric, but psychological, in the sense that the behavior is abnormal, is off the normal line, and needs to be modified.
What scope does the label mental health cover? When you say mental health, what does it refer to? Does it refer... let's hear from Professor Zaman.
Well, maybe I should take it up from there so that we have clarity. All these factors that have been mentioned are really germane to the consideration of whether a particular behavioral condition is psychological or psychiatric. In addition to sustainability, I think one of the major criteria agreed the world over, if all the symptoms presented constitute significant interpersonal, occupational, and social dysfunction to the individual. If they do, then they are psychiatric, all right? Because then the person should see the psychiatrist, he should see the doctor, and the doctor would examine and apply the appropriate diagnosis to the condition. Mental health is actually a continuum. It's actually a continuum. To the extent that it is possible that what is abnormal in one community or one society, could be normal in another. So it is really very difficult to draw a sharp line, except for all these factors that we have really mentioned. But what do you expect from a mentally healthy person? First is the pleasant emotions. Pleasant emotions, people are happy. But we cannot be happy all the time. So then what other factor comes in? The ability to cope with one's life challenges, especially stresses. Resilience out of adversity. These are all indicators of mental health, sound mental health. The ability to process information, to think right, to be in tune with yourself, and to be in harmony with the environment. These are all the parameters that constitute the gamut, the broad gamut of mental health.
Still staying with you, Professor Zamani, there are a couple of individuals who suffered from psychological issues. They go to a hospital and these issues are interpreted as mental situations, and then they are being treated for such problems. And then later on in life, they discover, after going to some other experts, they now discover that those were not mental problem, and then it leads to a higher and more complicated problem. How do you define that, where you have medical practitioners who cannot explain exactly what the situation is?
Well, good news. In Nigeria right now, I think we have gone past that situation. First, because
I have a patient who suffered from that experience.
Yes, I'll tell you. We have a full complement of the mental health team now, you know, in hospitals, especially the secondary and tertiary healthcare institutions. And that means that even where you find doctors, not all doctors can diagnose and treat mental illness. So there's a provision for experts. The psychiatrists are there.
In most of the hospitals?
In most of our hospitals. The only problem that we have is that there's a dearth of manpower. So you find them sparsely distributed to hospitals where they work. And the requirement is first that if you have a challenge, if you're unhappy, you can't sleep, you know, the first place to go is the hospital. You know, and you know, in these institutions, what happens is that at the outpatient, the doctor sees you, and because he's been trained in school to identify symptoms of abnormal behavior, he finds out that, look, these complaints are associated with mental health challenges. So you need to go and see the psychiatrist. Now, seeing the psychiatrist does not mean that the individual is mad. It just means that you are going to see an expert who has more knowledge and skills to sort things out for you. So the psychiatrist, in judgment, would decide, you know, to what extent have you suffered and what kind of help do you need so that this would not continue. Okay. Now, if it appears to be very severe, then of course other appropriate steps are taken. It is possible, however, that you know, you find in hospitals people who engage in unethical behavior, who go into realms of treatment that, you know, are beyond them, who are just waiting to label people, you know, in order to make money or to gain name and so on and so forth, to the extent that people who don't deserve a mental health diagnosis get a mental health diagnosis and they suffer the consequence, as you have just mentioned.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Zamani. Dr. Olushola Oluwanuga, again, give us a sense of what we know now about the state of mental health of Nigerians before we start talking about managing it in terms of the stats. What are the figures telling us, or what is the trend showing?
Well, as you know, we're just trying to work on the issue of acquiring good statistics regarding most issues in Nigeria. But there have been studies in the past that give us figures that range from 10 to 25%. It depends on where the study is done. If, for example, you go into the community, you would find that an average of close to 10% of people have issues, mental health issues. But if you do the study in a hospital, it could be as high as 40. Why? Because a person could be in need of surgery, but because of that, the person is extremely anxious. You know, and there are so many physical illnesses that carry mental health components to them. So it depends on where the study is done. having said that, the issue with mental illness also is that we tend to mix severe mental illnesses and common mental health conditions, which may not necessarily, in fact, require medication. For example, anxiety, just mild anxiety, mild depression, usually shouldn't require medication. But the extremely severe ones, for which a person would really require medication or immediate emergency attention, wouldn't account for more than about 1%.
Do we conflate the mental conditions that we have? Because, I mean, for the popular imagination, you would say that the person is crazy. I mean, that individual is acting unusually. And then you try to explain just what's going on. And that's one, that's at the individual level. Can there also be a communal or societal classification of Dr. Olushola is smiling, and Professor Zamani is also smiling. I mean, just driving habits, for instance. Some people will tell you when you are in some countries, look, or in some cities, people there are just crazy, you know, and even the way they behave. You were talking about a bus stop, for instance, where there's a crash involving two vehicles, the kind of arguments, they just take off their shirts as if don't have insurance companies to deal with some of those issues. And the way people shout, I mean, and the way they talk, the decibel is so high, and you are wondering whether they are hard of hearing or otherwise. So can there be a collective sense of low mental health in a community or in a society?
Well, let's say that stress makes people behave abnormally. And there is stress in the society when people lack money, when people lack electricity and so on. Of course, somebody that woke up in the morning and has left the house already stressed is not going to react normally. So there's stress in the society. There is also the need for us to have better enforcement of our laws, because also a lot of what we call abnormal behavior in Nigeria is just due to lack of law enforcement. Somebody sees a road, but because nobody is going to stop him, he just drives in the opposite direction. You won't do that in other countries, because the same person would not do it in another country where he knows there's camera enforcement, for example. So the society needs to be more orderly. We need to do more to make our society less stressful and for there to be better law enforcement.
Now, considering the level of stress in our society, let's take Nigeria for instance. We've talked about some of the issues that lead to stress. Can that now push one's mental health to go above the normal limit?
Yes, stress is one of the issues that makes people who are prone to developing mental illness to be tipped into it. This thing we call mental illness is like somebody has gone down the cliff, but there are factors, including stress, which push the person towards the brink. And then, when the person falls off the cliff, we say the person is now ill. So stress is an important factor.
Okay, but Dr. Moses Tinke, well, let's have your own perspective on this with regard to whether there can be a societal challenge relating to mental health, and if it's a continuum, where do we factor this in the Nigerian system, in the Nigerian condition?
Thank you. Actually, the society and the environment in which people live can actually make them behave and act in ways that we may consider to be abnormal. So in a very stressed society like ours, I say it's stressed because, I mean, almost everything is difficult to get. Everything is hard. The workload is much, and people tend to be doing the work that is meant for a lot of people. One person is doing it. So naturally, the person is stressed. And then environmentally, you go out there and out there in the roads are choked, the traffic congestion, and then electricity challenge, and all these things. And then the economic factors as well, where people are actually unable to meet their daily needs. So these things are actually stressors, and they actually make them behave in ways that people may classify as abnormal. But in the context of where that person is, we may not consider it as abnormal. For instance, if on the highway or on the road, and then you hit your car to someone else's, and then the next thing is the both of you park and there's an exchange of blows and people pull off their clothes. I mean, in some parts of the world, people might consider that as very abnormal, might even think such people involved in such a fight are actually mentally sick. But we can consider that maybe, let's say, in a place like Lagos, because, I mean, it's quite a very common occurrence. So that is actually the distinction between what may be considered as mentally abnormal behavior or normal behavior. So the society can actually define what that could be. But professionally, there is a guideline, there's a criteria for diagnosis. So before you could actually classify anybody or anyone as being mentally ill, the person must have met certain criteria for that particular diagnosis. Let's say there's a symptom list of maybe 10, and then the rule says if someone has 7 of them, you can say the person has this kind of illness. So if you're actually diagnosing, you would rely on the criteria, the professional criteria for diagnosis, and not on the societal criteria. Thank you.
All right, let's bring in Samuel Junaidu quickly. Considering the things we have observed, the level of stress in our society, will it be right to say that the level of mental health, in terms of mental illness in our society, is on the high side?
Well, first of all, let me go back to today being World Mental Health Day. The statistics says that about 50% of mental illness, their initial episode is usually at the teenage age, the early teenage age, and then about 75% by the time they get to 20. Now that tells us something, that there are a lot of factors, because most of these things, by the time they start manifesting, people don't really see them, people don't really understand what is happening, so it just goes and then continues to deteriorate until the period where the behavior started affecting significantly the person's ability to cope with the environment. Stress is one of the most important factors. In fact, it's a predisposing factor to mental illness. In an environment where you have, and stress is not necessarily that bad, because stress can also be a factor that builds your resilience. It's all depending on how you see it and the level to which the stress is persisting. So in an environment where you see, in an environment where it's highly stressed, you could have people tipping into mental illness, yet you could still have people building their resilience to situations that ordinarily could have tipped other people to mental illness. There are several conditions that can tip people to mental illness, and then people who have similar condition and then face stress. That is why you see maybe 2 people working in the same office get fired. One person would have mental illness, or one person would slump into depression. Another person would see it as a challenge and then build up resilience and then probably go into entrepreneurship. It's all depending on other factors that have been lying underneath, because mental illness is not just something that comes up because of stress. There are other things, there are other factors that stress bring out in people that makes them have mental illness or probably build resilience to it. So we can't really pin it down to only stress. We can pin it down to other situations that probably the person must have been going through that is not, maybe probably biological disposition. Maybe there's a genetical component to the person having mental illness, and then stress tip it off. So you would see that that person would have mental illness easily compared to other people who face similar situations.
So, but in a nutshell, what is the level in our society today, talking about mental illness?
Well, mental illness in our society is something that is underreported. Okay, because mental illness is highly stigmatized and highly demonized. So when people see an individual behaving in or exhibiting symptoms of mental illness, the first thing that comes to your mind is this person is possessed. So they don't really report such kind of situation. In fact, the pathway to care study shows that the hospital is usually falling below the chart. So people must have gone to other places to seek help before coming to the hospital to seek help. So most people don't really report the mental illness or mental health condition that they experience because of how highly demonized mental illness is in our society.
All right, Simon, thank you very much. Professor Zamani, aside from stress, which has been discussed at length by the other guests, what other factors impact mental health?
Right now, I think that we are in a very precarious situation here in Nigeria, and probably by extension other parts of Africa, in the sense that this question that you have just asked, have not really been examined by people in authority, especially the health authorities, to enable us get a clearer picture of those conditions that predict mental disorders in our society. Rapid social change, urbanization, is a factor because it places such, again, stressful demands on the individual for adjustment that, sometimes there are people who cannot cope. We are also seeing a situation where even infectious diseases have very strong associations with mental health conditions. Dr. Luanuga just said that. HIV/AIDS, for instance. Typhoid, for instance. Malaria, for instance. Things like that. We are seeing a situation whereby people are losing capacity to relate with one another. And so there is, a very high rate of armed conflicts now. And many people are traumatized. And this trauma is no longer individualized. For the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to see what you call intergenerational trauma. People passing trauma from one generation to the next. For now, we are all suffering from collective trauma. We can't deny that. These are all factors. Are you not traumatized, Joy? I'm traumatized. The society is not what it's supposed to be, and the insecurity, the lack of sense of safety, the disappointment, the disorganization caused, the displacement that has resulted in this terrible shift in our living conditions, are definitely, obviously traumatizing. So these are factors that impact. Religion also impacts negatively sometimes on mental health, especially when you have charlatans who are, high-profile religious practitioners. Sam just said that, one of the factors that affects, demand for good healthcare, mental healthcare, is denial, and this denial is usually caused by the fact that, apart from stigma, social stigma, there is the demonization of abnormal behavior, and who demonizes, this charlatan religious practitioners, just tell you because you can't sleep, because you have bad dreams, that there is a covenant between you and somebody in the spiritual world, and so on and so forth. Yes, so rather than go to Dr. Luanuga for just a small prescription that will make you recover and get back to work, you are made to fast for long hours, for many days. You sometimes even beaten, so that the devil will be exorcised. You are made to go on a very long guilt trip. Long guilt trip.
But Zamani, why are people focusing more on that angle? Why do people turn to go more often to these religious organizations for help?
I think lack of awareness or education, on mental health issues is one. Culture is two. And then, of course, mere criminal social mischief, by people who have some form of social authority to take decisions over others, make people to cue sufferers, in a direction where they would exploit them and make money out of them.
All right, that takes me to Dr. Oluwanuga, talking about the issue of awareness. Ordinarily, you have people walk into a health facility for medical checkup. In developed economies, people do that very often, maybe twice a year or so. How often do people, Nigerians, walk into hospitals to check the state of their health, especially when you talk about mental health?
Well, when you talk about health, yes, some people still go to check on their physical health. But mental health, very rarely, because to even decide to go to the hospital to ask for anything relating to mental health, for a lot of people, is scary.
Why is it scary?
Because of the stigma that is attached to it. Okay, I'll give you an example. Recently, in fact, it was considered that to have a case note in a psychiatric department should be punishment for road traffic offenders. That, they thought that I'm going to have a name in the Department of Psychiatry should make you drive properly. I mean, that shows you the way our society feels about mental illnesses. So people don't go and check on their mental health. It's only very few, maybe international organizations or very big PLCs. Sometimes they organize seminars and so on, and people talk about their mental health. That's not usually an individual consultation, but you hardly find people doing that. In fact, if somebody says to their wife, I want to go go and have a checkup with the psychiatrist, I say, no, don't go. What if they hear? What if you decide to take up a political position in future? Your opponents might say they know you once saw the psychiatrist. So we don't look after our mental health. The good thing is that the government is trying. If our mental health policy, which has been adapted, should be put in place, we should then have mental health care services available even at primary health care level. That means you should be able to walk to your GP, your family doctor, and apart from just looking at physical things, the person should be trained to say, how are you doing emotionally, and so on, and do a brief, what you can call mental checkup for you, without you having to go all the way to the psychiatrist. You should be able to have that in a general practice setting.
Okay. I would like you to speak to some of the facts that Professor Zamani already ticked off with regard to the causes of mental health challenges that we have in Nigeria. He talked about some kinds of diseases, how there might be a trigger. What are the others? And then also discussing environmental factors or discussing environmental stress. How do you sometimes also explain the behaviors among certain classes? You just referenced politics, for instance. How is there a mental issue, for instance, with regard to political thuggery, with regard to the level of desperation you will find among some politicians? Are those do they manifest mental issues that perhaps the society hasn't focused on?
Well, let me talk about what could predispose to mental illness. One important thing is genes and the environment. For example, even right from pregnancy, a person should eat right. If a woman does not eat the right nutrition and so on, you know, it's possible that that child is not likely to be as brilliant as the child of a mother who was well fed. Because, you know, there is nature and there is nurture. Even if a person's natural predisposition was, say, to achieve 7 out of 10, if there is no nurture, that person may end up only being able to achieve 4 out of 10 of their mental development. So right from pregnancy, women should be looked after to ensure that they are well born, the children are born as healthy as possible. Then look at education. It has been shown, for example, that people who do not learn to read and write are more likely to lose their memory early than people who read a lot and use their brains a lot. So good habits like reading, challenging your brain, helps to preserve your mental health even into old age. Things like substance abuse, drinking excessively, smoking excessively, or using illicit drugs, all those things could predispose the person into becoming mentally ill. Let me go to the other side of your question about our behavior. I think that we have a social malaise here, in that probably because of decades of poverty, people feel that whenever they get somewhere, they need to grab the greater share of whatever is available for themselves and their families. And so you find that in every sphere of life, there is usually that desperation to, you know, outwit the other person and so on, and just get ahead at all costs. We should not be. Excuse me, also probably because there's no social safety net. Whatever you have in life, you have to work for it. If somebody is ill, you have to pay the hospital bill, you have to pay for your child's education, pay for this and that. People feel they need to get everything. In other societies, people feel certain things are looked after for them already. So there's no great desperation to be this or that. So a lot of it is about the way that, you know, we have come to probably acquire maladaptive values, where people think that the richest person is supposed to be the most respected person. So people will try to acquire wealth by all means. So we need to do a lot of social restructuring to improve our general mental health as a society.
Dr. Oluwanuga, thank you very much. Let's get the views of both Samuel and Moses Tinge on this issue. We can discuss mental health in the abstract, but by the time you begin to narrow it down to observable behaviors in the society, I'm sure persons will be interested in hearing from you experts how you explain some of these things. I asked the question, for instance, about behavior of some political actors. Thugs, for instance, desperation for power. Is there a mental health issue there? That's one. And secondly, corruption. I'd like you to also speak to this. Dr. Oluwanuga was talking about that to say, okay, in the rat race that we find in Nigeria, sometimes, and I'm sure most Nigerians themselves who are not privy to this, get alarmed when they get to know about what one particular individual has amassed for himself. That probably, I mean, from one generation to next, it will never be exhausted. A person has over 100 or something houses. Are you going to split yourself into several parts to sleep in those houses? A person has so many cars. What are you? So some persons have raised the question: are these guys, you know, are they sick? Are they mentally challenged? Are they crazy?
All right.
Either of you could take it.
Yes. It may appear as though some of the behaviors that, do I call it elite, exhibit, may look quite abnormal and unusual. But I think it's a societal kind of thing. It's something that our society has actually developed over time. Over the years, so many things have happened. Politicians come and they go, people come and go, and the kind of behaviors they exhibit over the years, the next group that comes tries to outsmart the previous ones, and they want to actually get to a level at which they will be considered as great people or influential people, perhaps. But the behaviors they exhibit may look quite strange, but I think they have actually learned it over the years. They have acquired these behaviors because of the way our society has been run. So someone comes and becomes a political office holder, and the next thing is he's trying to acquire as much property as he thinks he can acquire, maybe because he doesn't want to come out and become poor, like maybe someone who came in and left before him. So it may look strange that sometimes they acquire even the things that they don't even need. Like if you have 100 houses in about 50 countries, I mean, you can't be traveling to all these 50 countries, or you can't be living in all these houses. Are you buying it for your generation that you have not even given birth to, or is it for your unborn grandchildren? So, but these things have actually been acquired over time. They look quite abnormal in this sense.
Is it a mental health issue? Because, I mean, speaking in general terms, some Nigerians say, oh, no, this person must be crazy. Not just political office holders. We have also seen public servants engage in the same behavior, whether in the civil service or in the public service. Samuel, let's have your take on this.
All right. Thank you. There seems to be a fight or flight tendency, if I would look at it from the psychological angle, where there's scarce resources, more like a survival of the fittest kind of approach, where there's scarce resources, everybody wants to grab because you never can tell when you would have such opportunities. Again, I will take us back to our definition of what mental health is or what mental illness is. There is also a cultural definition, a cultural definition to read, in which, just like Professor Zamani said, that what is abnormal in one society may be normal in another society. What we are seeing here may appear normal because if you ask an average politician, there is a tendency that he would also want to do the same thing. Though it is not a normal thing, holistically speaking, but it's value that we've come to adapt as a people, that everybody who aspire for political position want to grab whatever he or she can, because you never can tell when he or she would find himself in such position. It's not the right thing to do. It's not the right approach, but there are so many factors that are leading to such tendencies. The lack of, just like Dr. Moses said, the lack of social safety net, where there's nothing to fall back on, there's no policy guiding individuals who can't really afford to meet basic need. So you tend to see this kind of fight or flight. You want to grab all, or you just want to do whatever you can when you are in office, so that anytime you don't find yourself there, you have something to fall back, or your generation have something to fall back on. It's an unfortunate circumstances that we find ourselves, but that's what it is now.
Joy, I'm wondering, and I would like for Professor Zamani to listen to this and respond. Is there any analogy between what we are trying to explain, say the behavior of corrupt elements in our society, whether of the political class or the bureaucratic class? If you look at, considering unfortunately the way persons who have mental illnesses are treated, those who are vagrant, when you see a madman or a madwoman, you find all kinds of objects around, polythene bags, all kinds of things that may not be useful. Is there an analogy with that for somebody who then acquires mansions and mansions in different locations? And that's why I'm asking whether it's a mental health issue.
Yeah, I can see that you're really concerned about this.
No,
I'm also concerned. I am concerned. If you're not, but I'm really concerned that we've gotten to the point where we are. Just 2 days ago, somebody was telling me of a politician here in Nigeria whose financial worth is more than the current budget that we are operating. I mean, the current budget, the budget for this year, he is worth more than that. And he's really very active in the political space, because he wants more power. And why he wants more power is so that he will grab more. It's abnormal. For me, my narrative is that is abnormal behavior. It's mental illness for me. If you acquire money you acquire material wealth at the expense of other people. That is psychopathy. That's antisocial behavior. It is abnormal. If everything about life is me, the focus is me against others, it's abnormal behavior. Because truly, if there is sufficient concern, let's assume that in the prosecution of this anti-corruption war, we got to a situation where there was a national consensus. I'm talking about it as a national program.
Yes.
All right, because Dr. Oluwanuga has talked about social malaise. That is where our concern should start. There's something abnormal about us. She has also talked about the need for social restructuring. But I think we should be very clear about this. It's abnormal behavior. If we got to a point where we said, look, these things have gone on. There's a lot of greed. There's a lot of insensitivity. All right? There's a lot of wickedness. You know, you have somebody who is worth trillions of naira who cannot pay his laborers. 10,000 naira, 15,000 naira. What is that? We have governors right now, you know, who are worth billions of naira.
We have no evidence
who have received bailout, what do you call it? Bailout funds 5 times. Who cannot pay 18,000 naira minimum wage. Is that not abnormal? It's abnormal. We must call a spade a spade. So if we got to a point where we said, look, let these people be checked, I want to assure you that psychiatrists like Dr. Oluwanuga, and if she permits me to join her, would diagnose these people as mentally disordered.
But how do we get individuals like this to accept that they are suffering from a particular condition?
No. Again, it will amount to stigmatization. What we need to do is to begin to raise awareness about this so that the critical components, leadership components of society will become aware of the fact that, you know, it goes beyond prosecution, it goes beyond the law. You know, there is a medical side to it. There is a social psychological side to it. We need to, you know, they need to put that into their sphere of consideration so that whenever we find people like that, we subject them to, you know, a wide chain of assessment, all right, legal, medical, social, psychological, and so on, so that you know we can now generate norms of normality, of social morality, to enable us run this nation in a better way.
Well, thank you, Professor Zamani. Dr. Oluwanuga, I'm sure you've been itching to say something. I was just wondering, I mean, Nigeria wasn't always like this. Let's face it. So perhaps, as Dr. Moses Tenge has said, these are acquired behaviors. But having acquired those behaviors, what is the explanation for it? You talked about law enforcement, that it is on account of the fact that the law is not sufficiently and vigorously implemented, that you will find this kind of aberrant behaviors, like a person driving against traffic, running a red light, but just the kind of pure greed in the midst of want and adversity that people are asking whether what triggers a person to say, let me get this, let me get more and more and more, even those things that you don't need?
Well, I'm going to talk about that briefly. Just because I think that quite a lot of the time, people, these things are reinforced. If a man becomes appointed to a position today, the whole village starts to send to him about their children in school, their pregnant wives, and their nieces and nephews looking for work. So the person will want to take everything for himself so as to distribute. But I want us to focus on the 99% of Nigerians, because these people were talking about acquiring wealth and so on, they form less than 1% of our society. How about the 99% of Nigerians who have real serious mental health issues but don't have the access? People still have to make catastrophic payment to get care when they go to hospital. What can we do about making healthcare affordable, more affordable to our people? What can we do about making food available, good food, so that even when from pregnancy, mothers eat good food, they have good antenatal care. We're giving birth to Nigerians who, right from birth, have good potential. Primary education to be given priority, and teachers to be well trained. These are the things, because you see, a person grows up, goes through school. When they were in school, did they learn about morality? We no longer do moral instruction in schools nowadays. Civics is not taught anymore. We don't even teach history. So why will people not suddenly acquire new norms from various places and just, go well? But we have to make sure that this does not continue. We have to focus on the young ones. We have to help them to understand that the worth of their lives is not based on the value of their bank account. Let people know that integrity is worth more than money, and that good health is wealth.
Well, let's return once again to the causative factors of mental health challenges. You talked about excessive alcohol intake, excessive smoking, substance abuse, and so on and so forth. That's a provocative point I would like to raise. I mean, it seemed to have always been the received wisdom that marijuana could trigger mental challenges. I mean, anybody who used to see people going to joints, you will see them the first few weeks, they walk normally when they are going in. After a few weeks, by the time they are coming out, it's kurukere, as one musician would say, when they are walking out. And then after a while, they lose their minds. And now you are hearing of so-called medicinal marijuana. Is this, a shift, in medical science? Because some persons are already rationalizing that, every other substance might be dangerous, but not marijuana.
Well, the thing about marijuana is that people are taking information and running away with it without getting the complete picture. There are conditions in which a person already has suffered brain damage. And because of the fact that marijuana contains certain substances which release the effect, I'm trying to break it down. Let's just say affect the chemical connections that go on in the brain. Yes, so some people may benefit. But what I say is that they didn't say that a normal, healthy person should take marijuana. We're talking about maybe a person in severe, chronic, untreatable pain. We're talking about maybe a brain damaged person. So somebody who is not in either of those conditions and says, doctors now say marijuana is good. It's like somebody going to take a medicine that you don't need. If a person has an illness, you say, take an antibiotic or take something, and then somebody else does not have that illness and starts taking maybe anti-HIV medication, for example. That's not normal. So people should realize that this thing is a drug, and they should not take it unless they need it.
But how do you explain, Kingsley, a situation in, I don't want to call countries, developed economies, where it is being legalized? There's a particular country right now
economy.
That is
That is an economic decision. You see, as long as marijuana is not legalized, they don't make tax off it. And they also spend a lot of money prosecuting people for possessing marijuana. So they decided, look, if you want to damage your health, but we'll make money off you, we'll tax it. Now you find that companies, multi-billion companies now are being involved in marijuana, and that's billions to the economy of the countries. But you see, some of these things, we have to look down. Let's come back in 20 years' time, and let's look at their society, and let's see whether they are not going to say again, okay, we're recalling this. There was a time alcohol was illegal, and then it was legalized. So people feel, well, in the developed world, they say, well, it should be your choice. If you want to take marijuana, take it, but we'll tax you.
All right, Dr. Oluwanuga, thank you very much. And indeed, the other guests, we're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll take the tweets and then get into the concluding sessions of our conversation.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. So let the change begin from within. Look at you, Ogerula. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, welcome back and still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's quickly run through some of the tweets that we have and then ask our last set of questions to our guest. Mike Ayanko tweets, managing mental health like every other illness is a very big challenge in Nigeria. This is as a result of the general deterioration and neglect in our superstructure. It's unfortunate seeing people with mental disorder walking in the streets of our major cities stark naked instead of being in rehabilitation homes or psychiatric hospitals with modern facilities.
The next one is coming from Dele Jack-Solomon. He tweets, there is a need to strengthen mental health policies, legislations and plans through increased awareness of the burden associated with mental health problems. The government needs to reduce this burden by helping to build up the facilities and develop mental health policies.
Festus Akimboyewa tweet says, managing mental health should start with the individual. Nigerians should be encouraged to acquire self-management skills such as having a good night's sleep, recognizing what triggers crisis in their own mental health. Also, the ability to read the warning signs of a possible crisis.
Sani Michael Omakoji tweets, this topic is timely, especially that hate speech has become the order of the day, with politicians making all kinds of injurious comments in the name of political difference. This, to some of us, is abnormal behavior that requires mental reevaluation.
And this is from Odi Kelechi, that's the handle. It says there are ways to treat and approach mentally ill persons. You can as well help them, and not just the government. We all collectively can be of help.
And the last one is coming from Cecilia Okoroma. In Nigeria, we live in denial in managing mental issues because problems are also ancestral, bewitching, compounded by false prophecies.
That's right. In terms of talking about the facilities for mental health management, what has been our national experience, Professor Zamani? What has been our national experience? I mean, the very few mental health institutions that one gets to hear about. Earlier, you were talking about secondary and tertiary hospitals where there is a psychiatric specialist who would normally on duty or on call, but specialized medical facilities like the psychiatric hospitals would appear to be very few, and some of these ones were established decades ago. Have we made the right kind of investment in expanding facilities for mental health care? That's one. And secondly, how then do we kick into a modern thinking era of non-stigmatization of mental health, that a person could on his own walk into a mental health facility and receive needed attention, assuming that one is required?
Okay, let me just say that mental health is the least funded aspect of health in Nigeria. We have what it takes to actually serve the nation in terms of the facilities, even though there's room for expansion. For instance, all teaching hospitals have departments of psychiatry or departments of mental health, if you like. All teaching hospitals. There's none in this country that doesn't have. And then in every geopolitical zone, you have a specialized hospital. In some cities or in some states, you have two. You have, federal neuropsychiatric hospitals. They are specialized. But they are underfunded. The facilities that should be improved, to ensure appropriate delivery of service cannot be improved because they are not well funded. Having said that, we are seeing a trend whereby secondary healthcare facilities are also having mental health facilities. What I think we need to emphasize in addition to funds is manpower. Manpower, because we really need to beef up manpower. There are very many young people who have trained as doctors who want to specialize in psychiatry, but cannot. They cannot because of the gloomy picture that they see. So I am not sure that we have up to 150 psychiatrists in Nigeria. I'm not sure. We probably have had more than that, but majority have taken a flight out of this country. Now, how can we destigmatize mental illness? There is a current effort, and I want to commend the Association of Psychiatrists for that, for taking the initiative of trying to pioneer a policy that enables other medical practitioners, doctors, nurses, and so on and so forth, to provide some basic mental health services, at the primary healthcare level. And she alluded to the fact that if, for instance, somebody cannot sleep, he has anxiety, and he just decides he wants to go and see the doctor, in a primary healthcare setting, nobody would say he has mental illness. But if he says, I want to go and see Dr. Oluwanuga, it's already stigmatized. You get the point. So there are such efforts, and that dovetails to even psychological care, because there's currently what we call a mental health gap, again, which was the initiative of the Association of Psychiatrists in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Health, to enable psychologists, train community health extension workers or community health caregivers, in the rudiments of psychosocial services. So you have doctors and nurses who can prescribe, basic medication for mild mental health conditions. And then you also have people who can provide basic counseling, you know, to people who really need help at that level. And I think that because private facilities are springing up now, mental health conditions are becoming conditions that, you know, are acceptable, you know, by the society, you know, to be mentioned as a challenge that individuals have for which they need help.
All right, I would like Dr. Luanuga to speak to the issue of manpower and facilities. But before that, is there a relationship between menopausal condition and mental health? Because I know a couple of women who are going through severe traumatic experience, emotional trauma about this issue.
Well, menopause is a stage of life where there is a lot of, you know, hormonal changes going on, and that affects the brain functioning. So yes, when a woman is going through menopause, it is possible in some women that they also experience emotional upheaval, but it also has a lot to do with preparation and knowledge. If, for example, a woman is going through menopause and she suddenly becomes hot where everybody else is cool around her, if she knows that, look, this is a normal symptom of menopause, she might not be so distressed. But supposing she didn't know, because she wasn't really told that this could happen, she didn't have that information, she might feel psychologically distressed by the fact that, why is she the only person being hot in the room when everybody else is cool? Or why is she not sleeping well, and so on? And then she spends sleepless nights worrying about sleeplessness. So it's important for information to be available. And this is what we're saying about information being available, training and knowledge being available to primary healthcare providers. If a woman's doctor, just any family doctor she goes to see, already looks at her and says, how are you doing? You are approaching menopause now. Your periods are not coming regularly. It means that you are approaching menopause. And prepares her, probably just gives her a little pamphlet to give her the information that can reduce a lot of psychological stress. Now let me go on to the second part of your question about manpower. Nigeria does not have sufficient manpower to deal with our mental health care situation. It's important to note that effort is being made. There is a policy now, but a plan is yet to be enunciated. That is the next step that the Ministry of Health is going to take now, to roll out a plan. But when you roll out a plan, there has to be legal backing and there has to be budgetary backing. What is the budget that is being given for health? And what portion? The last study we had showed that only 3% of the entire health budget went to mental health. 3%. And then when you're talking about laws, do you know that since 2003, we've been trying to pass mental health legislation that even protects the practitioners? As it is in Nigeria, you actually could get sued in the process of your doing your job if people are to follow the laws. There's nothing in the law that actually properly protects both patients and practitioners in terms of mental health care, because we are using laws that date to 1903, and the most recent one we have is 1953. 1953 laws in 2018, and yet legislation has been before various national assemblies, including this seventh one, eighth one, and we are yet to have mental health legislation being passed.
What very quickly, what are the significant highlights of the proposed legislation on mental health?
Well, one of the things I would do would be to look after, you look at compulsory care, to streamline it properly so that there will be opportunity, for example, to take people off the streets if they are vagrant, because you'll be covered under the law. But if the law says, for example, one psychiatrist should see, a second psychiatrist should verify. And in the environment, you have only one psychiatrist. There also has to be policy to be backed by law to say you have to give this percentage of training. You have to create positions. Do you know that even if government wants to have more psychiatrists now, there's the problem of creating position. You still have to go to all the way to the office of head of service for the positions to be created.
Create the establishment.
But if legislation comes now, it will help the office of head of service. Oh, there's a law. We can now create more spaces. So everything works together, and we have to have a holistic approach towards it.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Olushola Oluwanuga was the chief consultant psychiatrist at the National Hospital here in Abuja. She's also a senior lecturer in psychiatry at the University of Abuja. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
We also would like to appreciate the clinical psychologist Samuel Junoidu. Thank you for your contribution. Dr. Moses Tingir, also a clinical psychologist. Thanks a lot for being around. And Professor Andrew Zamani. Professor Zamani, of course, is the immediate past president of the Nigerian Psychological Association. Thanks a lot for being with us. All right, so that does it for our conversation. Let's go on now to our sports desk.